I was on the edge of my seat, and every word that she spoke to me. So I have no doubt that you will find something of interest in what Tian has to share. All of her credentials are in the chat, so you can see that she is a fellow at the Meadows, a senior fellow at the Meadows. She's written 15 books, not one, not two, but 15 books. She is well connected with ACoA and is experienced dealing with trauma in special ways that I need to listen to very carefully. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Tian Dayton. We are thrilled to have her with us. And I know that you're going to enjoy the next hour or so. So strap up your seatbelt and get ready because it's going to be pretty great. Thanks, Tian. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tian, and I'm a child of an alcoholic, and I am here to be with you today to talk about how I got to this subject of relational trauma. Why am I so fascinated by relational trauma that I have spent the better part of my career investigating it and learning how to work with it? So I want to make sure this noise, I'm in New York City. Are you hearing all right? Is this noise distracting? Can somebody tell me?
You're just fine.
Okay. My father had a lot of addictions. My father was an alcoholic. He was a child of an alcoholic. He was a sex addict. He smoked cigars. And he was in the middle of this, a wonderful, very alive in the places. He wasn't dead or killing himself. He was the burning, loving center of my life. His alcoholism, which I personally, my personal thought is that we all had a part in it. His alcoholism and everything else that was everybody else's part slowly destroyed our family. It destroyed the fabric of the family. It destroyed the fabric of my father, and it went into each of us. But I grew up in the 1950s, and in the 1950s, we only knew about alcoholism, and we just sort of knew about alcoholism. We didn't know a family gets sick. We sort of knew you could be an enabler. But in the 1950s and 60s, we thought that if you could get the alcoholic sober, the rest of the family would be automatically better. We got my father sober for a little while until he relapsed and never really came out of it. But even when he was sober, we were not. I was in 8th grade at that time, but I knew that how could Dad stay sober when we weren't? I could sense that we had something wrong with us, and I didn't know what it was, and it didn't have a name at that time, but it had a sadness, and it had a loss built into it. I continued with my life, along with all these traits, was a life out there to live, and a good life, a life that I carried a lot of sadness through, but many things. And then I think that pain made me a much more creative person, maybe a more dynamic, mission-driven person. But there was a loneliness inside of me. I met my husband, my now husband, I met him when I was a child, but we got together when I was 23. And his mother was an alcoholic, and just as sick as my father, just as far gone, because in those days, we didn't identify anything early, or even in the middle, or even 3/4 of the way through. So he understood what I understood, and we had that in common. Once we were married, And we were happily, married and had a sweet family. We had what everybody wants, but there was something really missing. And when we fought, when we conflicted, neither of us had the tools to understand what was getting triggered inside of us from the past that we were importing into the present and recreating in the relationship we were in now. When we would have a fight or a disagreement, here's the professional line. Here's how I would put it. What stays numb inside of us, what stays unconscious inside of us, is a ticking time bomb waiting to be stepped on. And the thing that steps on it is relationships. Because we learned this pain we carry in childhood attachment relationships with our primary attachment figures. And remember, relationship trauma isn't something this is not necessarily about beating somebody up. Relationship trauma is the drip, drip, drip of neglect, of dismissal, of withdrawal, of not seeing you, but talking to something else. All of that is part of what can make a child, in polyvagal terms, freeze up, brace for danger, and feel unsafe. If that freezing, bracing, unsafe feeling happens repeatedly over time, we don't develop an emotional language to talk about feelings. So carry that into adult relationships. And what is numb, what is unexplored, what has never come into view and emotional literacy, when that pain gets triggered, we have never elevated it to a conscious level and thought about it. So we have no real way of separating the past from the present and understanding what it is that we're recreating in a relationship today. The way I want to show you more about this is through the work that I do, which is called psychodrama and sociometry. I have 4 film clips that Patrick is going to help me show you, and I'm going to ask him to pause along the way and point out, this will be kind of a mixture of a professional talk on this and just a talk about what's happening inside of a people and how I treat it. The first one I'm going to show you is called the feelings floor check. And that is something I created because my primary work is in the addictions field. And I have a model that I put into addiction facilities. Now, that sounds all like it just kind of happened. And this thing I just learned for 30 years. I've been developing it for 30 years. Hard one. I mean, why this isn't working. If you have a scientific mind about helping people, which we all hope we do, you are looking at what really helps. And if it's not helping, you have to, as a psychologist, I sort of want to hold myself to the standard of saying, this sounds good, but it's not really helping them. So what can I do better? The feeling floor check is something I learned that I feel I can do better because of this. Treatment centers are uneven. Some therapists are good, some therapists aren't good. What is consistent is there is always brilliance within the group. So I created a way to access the brilliance in the group over and over and over again. And if you're familiar with Steve Porges's polyvagal work, when he looks at this feeling floor check, he said, this is a new way of doing therapy because I am reducing the role of the therapist and enhancing the role of the client. I'm making myself as the therapist less important and creating many small connections with the clients. It feels, in Dan Siegel's words, welcoming and safe, so that clients don't feel they have to withdraw or brace or not be open. It's easy, and you'll see how it warms people up to their inner world, but in a relational context. And it's training new, simple ways of relating. That's what I'm going to show you first. And then after that, we'll look at something I call the trauma timeline, and that's sort of a different process. So Patrick, if you wouldn't mind, setting up that first clip.
Shall I press play?
Yes, please.
All righty.
Right now, I'd like to invite you to stand on a feeling that feels like where you are right now.
Pause. Okay. Patrick, thanks. So what I want you to notice is that people are out of their chairs, right? They're out of their chairs and engaging with each other. Big problem in treatment to just go around the room when everybody's sitting there and say, how do you feel? And somebody's got to talk back about how they feel. And the thing, remember, in trauma is that you're numb. You're not some of your feelings are not within reach. So they're hard to talk about. And the very nature of trauma is that we shut down feeling. The thinking mind shuts down at a traumatic moment, but the limbic system, which stores all the sense memories of an experience, is in high gear. So what that means is we're not making sense of experience as it's happening. So later when somebody says something like, tell me about your trauma, we kind of go, it's hard to find the words. So the danger there is that somebody's going to try to find words they don't really have. They're going to try to come up with a story, but words don't heal. You need to feel to heal. So this little process is designed to get people in motion, because remember, the body is where feeling is stored. Get people just looking around and making choices. Let's see, what feeling am I experiencing? Maybe not that one, maybe that one. Okay. Put a couple sentences on it, share it, and then move on. But all of this is connecting with people, connecting with themselves and other people. Okay, Patrick, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. And a sentence or two about why you're standing where you're standing, popcorn style. Not everybody has to share. When you're warmed up. In psychodrama, we work with the warm up. Share when it's up here and you're warmed up and you want to say it.
I'm feeling very, very cautious and just reluctant because this is such an unusual and different experience. Not sure how I feel. I'm kind of holding a lot of feelings in.
Thanks.
Well, I'm on the other, and I'm feeling similar to Stephen, but I'm feeling quite curious because I have no idea how this is going to transpire and what feelings it may kick up for me myself. So I'm just really curious.
Move to another question. What feeling do you have trouble feeling? What feeling do you like to kind of block or avoid feeling? What do you know?
Pause, Patrick. Pause.
What do you avoid feeling?
So what I want to point out is the laughter. Part of healing, part of coming back from trauma, because trauma is about shutting down and getting smaller and more interior. Laughter is an important part of healing. So this process is structured so that it doesn't feel scary and chaotic. It is predictable because the brain likes prediction. So we want the brain to relax and come back on board and be willing to feel and heal. And it is structure is predictable, and it's playful. I mean, what you'll see is people start to relax a little and make jokes, and all of that is a very welcome part of the process. Thanks, Patrick. Okay.
Do you not want to feel? What feeling you want to keep at a distance?
Okay, hit it, Patrick.
Okay, who's warmed up?
What feeling do you want to keep at a distance? I entered trauma work without using the word trauma because people get scared about the word trauma, and then they go spinning off in their heads and they wonder what happened to them and what event took place. Only part of trauma is event focused. The rest of it is just how seen, held, and attuned were your relationships in childhood? Or did you have to hide important parts of yourself in order to stay connected to the people you needed in order to survive? That's another way to be traumatized. And in an alcoholic home, dysfunctional home, I mean, we hide naturally stuff that hurts. But if there's a lot of chaos and pain in the house, we hide a lot. So we're bringing people in therapy out of those unconscious numb states, but in a simple way, not talking about trauma, just what feeling do you avoid? That is trauma work, because we avoid feelings that hurt to feel. So, but as you can see, it's a friendly approach. Okay. Thanks, Patrick.
Rage is the one that I don't. Well, I'm smiling often. That's what I do. That's actually when I feel rage, I smile. It's one of my mechanisms. I instantly go to something like as far away. If I don't want anyone to think like I'm not rageful. But it's just difficult just saying it and sort of standing in it. And it seems to be connected to so many other things: sadness and resentment. It's like a swirling sort of a sensation, sad, and even joy, sadness, anger, resentment, joy. Rage is just like,
Thanks, Anne.
As I was standing here, I was realizing I just lost one of my coworkers, died suddenly, and that's very much present with me too. And you know, I'm kind of annoyed that I'm here right now, because I'm very much somebody who I'd rather feel rage than nothing, you know, and I want to be able to identify my feelings and to articulate them. So, you know, I want to avoid being numb, you know, and I spent many years in this place, and it's very uncomfortable.
Well, I'm having a lot of trouble coming to terms with fear. My life has been run by fear. My decisions, I mean, really significant decisions like getting married, were run by fear. And I'm aware that I spend a lot of my time being vigilant about avoiding fear, which means avoiding a lot of the time other people's feelings. I'm spending a lot of my time being afraid of other people's rage, but of other people's sadness too. There's any strong emotions from other people. I find I have to protect myself from, and it's just such a cage. This fear thing is such a cage that I know that I've self-medicated over big time.
Yes. Whoever feels like it, whoever's warmed up, doesn't have to be everybody.
I will share. When I first heard the question, I heard it as, which of these feelings do you avoid? And I couldn't decide because there's a lot. And then you reworded the question, and it was, which of these feelings do you have the most difficulty with? And this was very apparent. And I'm not sure why, but I know that is definitely one of the ones. Loneliness could hit me so quickly and just so deep. And but it was interesting how everything was a blur, and then I reworded it. This stood out.
People know.
Yeah, that was the same thing for me, because I heard the difference in how the question was presented. And my first response was the one that I am probably more afraid to express, would be the sadness and anger, but then when we switched the other way, it would be the fear and the anger that are difficult. I'd like to be able to express, but I don't. Like, I'd like to get real angry. I'd actually like to go to rageful and try it out for a while, but I don't go there. And I don't go to sadness. I don't cry easily. So I would really like to be able to do that, you know. It's difficult. And I do avoid the fear thing, though. When I get afraid, it's like I get busy, I get joyful, I get spiritual, and I don't go towards spiritual.
Thanks. So I wish I could actually hear what you're thinking, because I think you can see how feelings get warmed up inside of people. And so the real purpose of these floor checks, and I have anger floor checks, trauma symptom floor checks for everything you can think of. It's this slow warm up. And because we're in a 12-step room, you understand that part of this model is very compatible with 12 steps. My 3 influences were Montessori. I was a Montessori teacher in my 20s. Moreno, the world of psychodrama, and sociometry, obviously, is the core influence. And the other is my 12-step understanding that this beautiful peer healing has such a profound impact on all of our lives. So you can see a little of all of it, perhaps. And the next thing we're going to look at, when I started working with trauma, once again, this was, I'm saying, in the 80s or so. At first, people used to, let me check the time. And so yep. At first, when I would talk about it, people would literally just sort of get flooded. I could see them getting kind of woozy dozy. And I was just learning about it myself. So my clarity on the subject has grown so much. And relational trauma was something I was one of the people who started to talk about that early on, because initially we saw trauma as these big events, wars, abuse, rape. But I started to, as I got deeper and deeper into the literature and into helping people with it, I realized, now this is all of these symptoms of trauma are part of growing up with this freeze response, part of growing up hiding important parts of yourself. So when I would talk to people, the initial thing about trauma is a trauma narrative, telling a story, tell us, the idea being that if part of this is unconscious, you heal by making it conscious and being able to string these things together. Well, while I think there's value in that, we don't want to tell a story about our trauma. We want to be able to feel a story about our trauma and process a story so that we eventually can move through it, so that we don't have to just live at the other end of this story. And I'm sure you've all evolved in the same way. We've all kind of evolved through this together, I think. But I started using something I called the trauma timeline. I just sort of out of desperation, because people would fog up with the word trauma. So I worked with it in 2 ways. One, I started putting symptoms all over the floor so that people no longer got flooded by these lectures on the chalkboard. But I would say, walk over to a symptom you're identifying with, walk over to a symptom your family struggled with. Tell us about that. Walk over to a symptom that you feel you've made some progress in managing. And that, by doing that, people became choice makers. They got their volition back. These are qualities of resilience. They were on their feet in the room, tuned into themselves and other people and sharing. And that creates resilience as it's healing the trauma. And that it was an important addition to my work, because I was always worried that we're just recycling the trauma through psychodrama. We're just yelling at the same people. We're just trying to find a culprit for the trauma. So the floor checks bring it into the here and now. And they bring it into issues that the implication is we're going to talk about them and work through them. We're not going to just find characters in our life to pin blame onto so that we can tell a story with characters. We're going to walk through our own lives in a bottom-up kind of a way, the feeling from our bodies coming up, feeling it, naming it, sharing it. That's what emotional literacy is. It's not some disembodied thought process. It's a full body experience. So this group you will see doing the trauma timeline. We first put it down on paper. And what people tend to find then is, wow, I didn't realize all those things happened then. And then they'll say, you know, but nothing happened in here, although it felt like I was still being traumatized because I never really worked on what went on in my early childhood. Or they'll say, the people in good recovery say things like, you know, it's not that bad things haven't happened since I've been in recovery, but I process them. So I'm not experiencing them as so traumatic. But the trauma timeline helps to get a where and a when. When did this happen? Who was around? What were the feelings surrounding it? Rather than have it live in this kind of vague fog. You're going to see people writing a timeline, just sharing it a tiny bit. That's a long process, actually, but I just want to show it to you. And then as a group walking onto the timeline, and then you'll see one individual walking her timeline. So let's go with clip 1, Patrick, please.
The trauma timeline?
Yeah, clip
You got
1
it.
of the moment. Yeah.
You got it.
Thanks. Oh, is that clip 1?
Not to know.
Patrick, I think that is clip 3. Clip 1 should be, do you have something else that looks like it might be a clip 1?
Walk over to one of these symptoms
Okay,
that draws
look
you
at
right.
this. Let me introduce this. This is the symptom flora check that I just told you about. Okay.
Right now.
So I went to depression, and depression is the way I check out. I don't sleep, I disappear, and in the past I would use substances. Now I'm in recovery. I still use other substances, but depression is more key for me.
Hey, I'm standing next to Relational. And the reason when I feel weak and out of control in life, I try to control my emotions.
Something to share. Walk over, place your hand on their shoulder and share with them. Oh, okay. Somebody's not walking over. So I'm going to come over
Pause.
here. And you're standing.
What you're seeing is the symptom floor check that I described to you earlier, symptoms all over the floor. Instead of telling people you look like you might be emotionally constricted, are you depressed? Instead of telling people what they are, I let people choose what they identify with at the moment. And in this choosing, and then share about how that works for them. And people are wonderfully articulate, and people know better how to share for themselves. That in itself is healing, just sharing, but in a way that's educational. I'm not asking them to just share about anything. I'm saying, what in this arena of symptoms are you identifying with that we can focus in on, that we can help you with? In the course of this, I also say, walk over to someone who shared something you identified with and tell them what it was. So when someone doesn't walk over, I noticed this one guy just was sort of frozen in place, and that's why I walked over. Keep going.
Hang on.
Distorted reasoning.
Why aren't you moving out?
I think I was pretty much in my own head.
And you know what popped you into your own head?
Yeah,
Okay, do you mind sharing that?
you bet. Well, the one that pops up for me the most is when I was a little kid, my grandmother would lock me in a basement. And the reasoning that I would be given was because I was so out of control, there was no other options. And, you know, then I was just kind of thinking how much that's probably gotten in the way of me being able to resolve that, because if I believed that reasoning, then then basically that's the only thing that could have happened. So I'm just kind of busting that in my head right now.
So let's bust it. Let's hear how you're busting it.
That there was plenty of other options, and that I don't necessarily buy that I was out of control. And that if I was, there's plenty of other ways that they could have dealt with me.
Let's name a couple.
Hug me, hold me. I mean, I was 3.5, so I don't think putting me in a basement. I mean, so if they needed to confine me, they could have done it with physical space, you know, just to give me a real firm hug and leave it at that.
I was tiny and they were huge. This went way beyond controlling me physically. This was punitive. This had to do with their issues and not mine.
Yeah, and I guess creating an experience for me where I got to experience like quite a bit of fear that I don't think I should have in that circumstance.
I was terrified in that basement. I didn't know when I was going to get out. I didn't understand why they were locking me there because I was only 3.5. So the sense I made of it at the time was?
I don't think I made any sense of it. I was just angry.
I was just angry.
I was angry that I was not big enough to just
Pause.
basically push through the door.
Now, you see what I'm doing is called doubling in psychodrama. I'm just joining the protagonist and saying either what he's not saying, putting words on what he's struggling to put words on, or just helping him feel seen from the inside, witnessed. Okay? Good for you. So we're just going to let you push through the door psychodramatically and take a step over here out of the basement. Okay. Okay. And how does it feel to be pushed through the door?
I felt like I left a bunch of emotion back there. Now I'm kind of more peaceful.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I don't want to go back there.
Choose a new one. Choose a new one. So what you saw there was somebody, what we call an act hunger in psychodrama, or a thwarted intention trapped in the body. Now, what you see when you look out around our world are act hungers that are being acted out in very destructive ways every day. In psychodrama, we provide the stage, the area to put role players on, to release an act hunger, to move it through the body into action. When he said, I was just angry, I couldn't push through the door. And that stays in the body. And that gets lived out in ways that aren't good. At the very, small ways, and parents who were abused their children. And in very big ways, you pick up a gun and you go to a school and open fire. So we gave him an opportunity to push through. And once he pushed through, he sensed himself, I guess I don't want to go back there. So then you choose again. You keep. Psychodrama is about, sociometry anyway, is about making continual choices. And floor checks are the concretized group dynamics. And floor checks are just something I've created myself. And I'm just saying, it's all about choice. It's all about autonomy, choice, individuality, intuition, volition, resilience. Did you find something that looks like clip 1 of the trauma timeline, Patrick?
There are 2 trauma timeline clips. There's the one that I showed you previously, and then there's one additional clip. So maybe we can give that other one a whirl.
We'll try that, yeah, and we'll see what we've got.
So a lot of feeling like I wasn't, that I didn't fit in to the group.
Okay,
and
pause.
like this is.
So we're missing a couple clips. So I'm just going to tell you what came before, and then you'll catch up to where we are now. She has written the trauma timeline, right? She's put on her timeline what, in fact, the various issues that she feels stuck with, or that hurt, or that are, a place she's inhaled and never exhaled again, or where there was actual trauma, etc. And the group has, if you see the numbers on the floor, at the next point, I invite the full group on and just say, walk over to the age where you feel you've got some work to do. And that means, once again, they are aligned according to age. In the same way, in the feeling floor check and the symptom floor check, they're aligned by feeling, or they're aligned by symptoms, so they can talk to each other if they want to. Here on the trauma timeline, they become aligned by age. If you go to my website, tiandayton.com, I think you will find the trauma timeline under the tab sociometrics. So we've done that process. And in that process, the babies talk to the babies, the teenagers talk to the teenagers, the, adolescents talk to each other, and they heal each other. They have something special to give each other, like we have in the rooms. So in treatment, that's a very vulnerable time, just as it is when you are in the rooms in recovery. It's a fertile time for people to give something to each other that a therapist doesn't necessarily have to give at that moment, because remember, you're just doing a lot of work. It's what you do every day. But when you're in treatment, you're there to be open. You're there to be vulnerable. You're there to connect with yourself and those around you. So I create these processes so that people can do just that. And I find that people have something to give to each other when they're in that situation that I don't necessarily have to give them. My job is to keep the process safe, to keep the process going, but not to be the giver of the knowledge or the giver of the healing, just to facilitate the healing. Now here, what you're seeing this young woman do is walk her own timeline. After she's done these other two processes, she's walking through her own timeline. Okay.
So when I was introduced to alcohol at age 14 and marijuana, this is it. And this is how I can be in this society and function properly and not feel like I'm not good enough anymore. And I felt good enough.
Before this, when she was in the beginning of her timeline, she was telling us that as a little girl, suddenly she was tested for 2 days and put on medication and sent to a special school and feeling quite different, and as if she didn't fit in, as if in her natural self, she wasn't quite making it and she needed all this help. And why did she need all this help? And what was different? What was wrong with her? So here, she is walking to the next stage of teenagehood when she discovers a way to fit in. She discovers alcohol and drugs. Okay.
When I was on those things. And so self-medicating came very easily, because at the age of 7, I was told that if you're not good enough, if you take this medication, you will become good enough. So now I'm introduced to alcohol and drugs, and I find out, turns out that you could do these things and be good enough with your peers.
Anywhere else you want to talk that you feel?
Yeah, I'll explore one more thing.
Okay.
I got sober when I was 19, and when I was 20, I really struggled in sobriety, hit like a pretty intense bottom in sobriety. So I can talk to that
Look
person.
around the room.
I will choose you, if you're cool with that. Hey.
Reverse roles.
Okay.
Pause.
Sorry.
What she is doing is choosing a role player to play the part of her that hit that bottom after she got sober. So that's what we can do in psychodrama. We can enroll parts of the self or other people in order to work something through. Here, she's templating a dialogue with her own self. She's learning to bring that self that she hasn't thought about in years out of cold storage, put her into a character, and meet her again so that she can, in real time, have a conversation. And that is why the role player, you'll see I use role reversal so role players don't make things up, because the protagonist is the one with the information. So in this process, I will make sure that we get the real information. Okay, thank you.
Hey. Oh. Hey. So I'm here, I'm in sobriety, and I don't want to be here anymore.
So because trauma is in the body, I'm paying attention to you going to the shiver that went through there. So let's, it's still going on, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Just let it happen.
Okay.
Any more shivers want to happen?
No, but I just do want to say that I'm surprised that I picked this part. And clearly there's something going on, but I didn't know that there was something going on.
That's a really good
It's really interesting
teaching point, because that's what happens.
But the timeline really helped too, because I put in all these things at this one time in my life that I never thought was a challenge in my life.
Exactly. So you learned something by putting it in the timeline where your work was concentrated that you weren't aware of before. And did you learn anything about where there wasn't trauma?
Yeah. And I also, like 11 years old, it's so all these things happen, and it's just fascinating because I never noticed that.
Yeah.
That was an age where a lot of things happened.
A lot of things, good, bad, and different.
Yeah, exactly.
All
Good,
sorts of
all sorts of things.
all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So interesting.
In a small period of time.
In a small period of time, and you thought they were stretched out over a longer period of time.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
but I also just never really thought about a lot of the things that I wrote down.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, what do you want to say from this part of yourself that's surprising you today?
It's just really hard to be sober, and
Okay, I'm picking up something in here and on the shoulder. Is there and in here in the throat? So what's?
Yeah, basically, I don't want to be here, and I don't really want to be sober, and it's not that I don't want to be sober and I don't want to be drunk. I don't want to be either one of those things. I just don't really want to be living in this life.
Let the tears come if they want
Pause.
to. Just let them come.
So you'll notice the body is leading the way. The feeling surfaces first in the body. And as her therapist, I am paying attention to what's coming up in the body. And that's where the truth is. She has not explored these issues in years. She wasn't aware of them. They come up in the body. And if we don't pay attention to the body, we don't find the issues. But as I'm watching it and helping her just give that part of her a voice, or let the body speak, she gets to parts of herself that she's cast aside. And this was a very big moment for her. But you can see that it's arising in a way that is manageable. So a little bit at a time. She's on her feet and she's moving, and that helps it be manageable. And she's not asked to talk about it before she's feeling it, before she's experiencing it. Experience comes first, the body comes first, and then the words follow. Okay, thank you.
The less you fight it, the more the healing comes.
Because I'm sober and I went to rehab and I got all this amazing treatment and I'm going to all these meetings and I'm meeting with a sponsor and nothing's really changing.
A little more on nothing. Because nothing's changing, I feel like
powerless and empty and lonely and tired and exhausted.
And I'm just feeling all the stuff that I drank over and smoked weed over.
Yeah.
And it's all coming up now, but I don't have any of my medicators.
Yeah, there's this really, when you're sober, you feel like you got off drugs and alcohol and here you are and, this is the solution, but you're really left with this problem.
Okay. I'm hoping the clip we have left is the follow-up clip for that. Let's try it. And if not, we'll come back and I'll just talk about it. What do you think? Yeah. let's see.
Okay, not to know where this is all coming from.
Okay,
That's
pause.
okay.
What she's doing now is having worked through this, and she continued, I think, to walk on her timeline a little bit, but that was really the you hear the world is doubling the moment. This was a big moment in her life, Sirens. So once she could work through that, then she can talk to that part of herself and it, in a sense, make a new kind of a connection. So that's, I think, what we're going to see now.
And it's going to be okay.
Okay, and sorry, one more pause. She is the adult self again. She was in the last clip, she was still her teenage self who didn't want to be here. Now in this clip, we have reversed roles and she's her adult self talking soothingly to the teenage self and creating a new rapport. Here's because what happens when we've been traumatized is when we get triggered, we speak to the world or to the relationship from the wounded part without any filtering. So one of the things in trauma healing is to learn to experience and hold and listen to these wounded parts and create a new connection so that when we get triggered, we develop an ability to sit with the part of us that's triggered and translate the feeling into words so that we have a better shot at being understood as an adult and getting what we need. When we blurt it out from the wounded part, who wants to hear it? I mean, we're too much for ourselves. Why would anyone else want it thrown on them? And we're not making sense. And we're bringing our painful self to the world. And we're asking the world to solve it for us in a sense. Here, you deal with this. So part of healing is to teach clients to make friends with these parts of themselves and learn to listen and then help them talk in a grown-up language. Okay.
I think that's the flutter, is this relief. Because I'm permission giving. I'm giving you permission to feel what you're feeling. We're in this together. And I'm not trying to medicate you or push you down or not have you feel the way that you're feeling and put on a happy face, talk about the solution. I want to listen to what you have to say. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
For a long period of time, I felt like I was unlovable.
What we're doing now is sharing. And again, these are just small examples of a long process. But what happens and what we can do is open the window to some sharing. And when we do the Q&A, feel free to share also just the way you see these people doing, because during the course of watching these, I imagine feelings have come up for you. And if you want to share them, go right ahead. This is how the group heals, through sharing. And sharing is always done with the protagonist. It is not feedback in psychodrama. It's not, you did a great job, you this. It is sharing what came up for me, witnessing your drama, watching your drama, playing a role in your drama from my own life is this. And that way, the protagonist feels you really were there with them, and they don't feel you're giving them a grade on their psychodrama. You're helping them come back into the group and into the moment, and the group member is healing for themselves. Okay.
And I made a lot of very, very irresponsible decisions. College was just a shit show. Really did not like myself at all. That came out a lot in some of my intimate relationships. And I just needed something for a long time I felt it was someone, but I needed something that eventually I got within, and that was acceptance, because I didn't, because if I was unlovable, I wasn't loving myself. And that's why there was no point to anything at all. And for me, that came later, and that also came through my own work.
So many things, but first, thank you for your vulnerability. What it brought up in me is my difficulty in being vulnerable, and to have the outward appearance that I'm good, like everything's good, I'm in control, and nobody's going to get close to me. When you shared, it kind of gave me permission to be vulnerable.
So it just feels like this whole process has just been really, really powerful, because I haven't thought about my 20-year-old self, because it was 5 years ago, in the way that I've thought about my 7-year-old self. Writing down that timeline was really interesting for me, because again, I just really did not recognize that around age 11 there was a lot of stuff that happened. The whole when Lori looked at me and said, "You are smart," that was a really intense moment for me, because I forgot about how stupid I felt when I was a kid. Like, it really brought back this like intense feelings of feeling like dumb, So that was super powerful, and yeah, like I just never really, you asked me, do you want to keep on going? And I figured, sure, I'll be the guinea pig, I can do this, I can talk about this stuff. So I don't know why I chose 20, I just did.
So that young woman went on to get a doctorate. This was about 10 years ago. She's a doctor now, a psychologist. She broke through something. And then she just had all this energy to meet her moment. So now I'd like to, I want to say something that's, and to end with this, it's a little 12-step like maybe, but it would be part of my share if I were in a meeting today, is that something phenomenal is going on in America today around the subject of free speech and accountability, and in the Congress, and part of seeing this was I was watching the press in the chamber, just standing there, very kind of, waiting for the action to start, when they would film and they would write and they would the free speech of the press, right? Something I have learned these years never to take for granted. And I think there's, in my heart, I wanted free speech in my family. And I think that is something that family trauma deprives us of, because we're scared to speak freely. And whether it's a person or a family or a country, we need to say what is in our hearts, and to say it well, because we also see in our country what happens when you don't respect, when you abuse free speech, and when you don't know what it really is. But I think recovery is, and emotional sobriety is, at its core, developing the ability to have responsible, caring, relational, free speech. And learning how to do that in a way that is good for self, good for the relationship, and good for the world we live in.